Game of Thrones finally returns this weekend, so I'll be going through the top 3 things I hope happen this season and the top 3 things I hope don't happen this season. Welcome to the very first episode of SDW.
Super Dario World!
It's a me,
Dario!
Woohoo! Let's go!
We have a lot to get into, so let's get this out of the way real quick. You're all new to the podcast, so please follow me on social media if you don't do so already. You can find me at Dario the Show on Instagram. Feel free to contact me there. Leave any comments, questions, suggestions. I greatly appreciate all the feedback as I continue to develop this show. So thank you in advance for that. And okay, let's get into it. After 2 very long years of waiting, Game of Thrones finally returns for its 8th and final season this Sunday, and I could not be more excited about it. I'm so happy to see the conclusion of this series, and I know I complain about the show a lot. For those of you who don't know me, I care about this show way too much, I care about the story way too much, and I complain incessantly about that. But that's not what this podcast is going to be about. Now, I'm hopeful. I'm starting off with a clean slate, man. They had 2 years to develop this season, so my expectations are higher than before. I'm hoping that in those 2 years, they managed to fix all their continuity issues, and everything is going to come out great. I want this show to be great. I want to have a great ending. Now, I read the books before the series, so I'm more of a book guy, and at this point, the stories are so far apart that I have no idea what's going to happen. So for those of you worried about spoilers or anything, don't. I have no idea what's going to happen. I know just as much as you do. This is all going to be 100% speculation here. If I guess correctly on a few things and spoil stuff, I'm sorry. I hate spoiling things. That's not my intention. This is just, I know the story really well. I read a few theories online. I developed a few of my own. And with that information, I developed this list of the top 3 things I hope happen during the final season and the top 3 things I hope don't happen during this season. So let's start with the positive. The things that I do hope happen. Number 3, I hope Daenerys becomes the Mad Queen. Or at least, well, actually, I already think she's the Mad Queen, but I hope people recognize her as the Mad Queen, because bitch has been off her rocker for a while now. And the best example I have of this is, if you remember, after the Field of Fire, Randall and Dickon Tarly, who are Sam Tarly's father and brother. Sam Tarly, you can remember him, he's the fat guy from the Night's Watch. Anyway, those guys, after the Field of Fire, they had surrendered, they were captured, and Daenerys wanted them to bend the knee and turn to her side. They refused, and she burned them alive with a dragon! Prisoners of war, who'd already surrendered, were burned alive by a dragon! Her logic, though, was pretty good. Her excuse was, we don't have room for them. It's a war. We don't have room for prisoners of war. Friggin', those are nobles, and she burned them alive. So it's her logic is, if you don't follow me, I'll burn you alive. How much crazier can you get? Like, you know who used to do that? You know who used to burn people alive when they didn't, obey him? The Mad King! That's who! Anyway, the point is, if they're going to go for this Dark Daenerys angle, I hope more people are actually starting to get concerned, like, dude, this bitch is crazy. Like, might burn us alive with a freaking dragon. We gotta stop her. So I'm kind of, I'm hopeful that they'll go on that angle, and they'll just, because Daenerys so far has been a Mary Sue. Everything goes her way always. So I'm hoping that if they're going to commit, 100% to making her, like, truly dark side. Number 2 of the things that I hope that happen this season of Game of Thrones is I hope the Golden Company betrays Cersei, and I hope Varys betrays Daenerys. Now, this is going to take a little bit of explaining. The Golden Company is a mercenary group that will be introduced this season. If you remember, at the end of the previous season, Cersei sent all the Greyjoys to pick up the Golden Company, and it's an army. It's supposed to be the greatest mercenary group out there. Now, in the books, the Golden Company does exist, but they are loyal to another faction. I'm not going to spoil that for you. If you want to read the books, read the books. The point is, they are not loyal to the Lannisters. They're loyal to another group trying to conquer Westeros. Here's the thing, though. So far, Varys looks like he's part of that group. So if the introduction of the Golden Company is a plot from Varys. And I don't know if any of you remember this, but Illyrio, the guy who basically sold Daenerys to Drogo in Season 1, those two are in cahoots. So if the introduction of the Golden Company is a way for Varys and Illyrio to kind of take control of King's Landing while Daenerys just loses her whole army in the north, I'm going to be really excited for it. So far, I doubt this will happen because Varys has been pretty much useless in the last few seasons, and nobody remembers Illyrio. I'm pretty sure that all of you hearing this are like, who the hell's Illyrio? What are you talking about? Who's Drogo? Anyway, so I doubt this will happen. It has a 1% chance of happening, but I'm hopeful. You know, there's always a chance, and it would be cool if they do go in that direction. Anyway, number one of the top things I hope happen during the final season of Game of Thrones, and this one has like a less than a 1% chance of happening. If the other one seemed hard, this one is even hard. I'd say a 0.03% chance of happening. But I hope, and I mean I hope, that Littlefinger's still alive. Now let me explain, because that does sound kind of crazy, and you're like, what? But we saw him die last season. What are you talking about? Hear me out. Littlefinger is the most important character in all the series, except for maybe the Night King. But every single thing that has happened in the show, all the political intrigue, the Starks versus the Lannisters, the death of Ned Stark actually going to King's Landing in the first place, has been orchestrated by Littlefinger. Everything. I can go deeper into all the things that he's done, but it would make this go on for too long. The point is, the guy has had a very, very, very complicated plan from the beginning. And in the last season, it was like, what was his plan all along? Just to, what? Go to Winterfell and die? That makes no sense. And this is something that bugged me a lot with how he died. First off, it was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in my life because they completely destroyed the character. For those of you who don't remember what happened, they gave us a fake out where it looked like Sansa was going to make a trial for Arya, but turns out it was just a setup for Littlefinger. And that's when Littlefinger says his little, "Excuse me, Lady Sansa, I am a bit confused." And then they lay out a whole bunch of charges against him. Sansa testifies that he saw her kill her aunt in front of her. Bran says that, in his visions, he saw all the things that he'd done. So apparently, he was caught, right? But this is Littlefinger. This is the greatest liar on the show, and he had years to come up with an excuse for everything. In fact, let me remind you of a line that he says earlier on this very season, and he says it to Sansa. He says, "Don't fight in the north or in the south. Fight every battle everywhere, always, in your mind. Everyone is your enemy. Everyone is your friend. Every possible series of events is happening all at once. Live that way. Nothing will ever surprise you. Everything that happens will be something that you've seen before." Basically, what he says there is, have a contingency plan. So, the guy who believes in contingency plans more than anybody else was caught without a contingency plan. And this really bugged me because as I was watching that scene, I'm nowhere near as smart as this guy. But I could come up with an excuse for everything. For example, Sansa says, "I saw you murder my aunt." Littlefinger could have been like, "Excuse me, Lady Sansa, I believe that you already testified in front of John Royce here that I had nothing to do with it, that she killed herself. So were you lying then, or are you lying now? And are you admitting that you were an accessory to your aunt's murder?" That would be like an easy out for me. And then when Bran says that the things that he's seen in his vision, like, "Excuse me, are we accepting visions now as evidence? Because I've had several visions of many of the people in this room." Boom. Easy out. And that was, on the spot. This guy has had time to plan it. So here's where the conspiracy theory comes out. Earlier in the season, you see Littlefinger giving money to a stranger. And so the theory here is that Littlefinger, foreseeing that he's going to be betrayed by Sansa, pays this faceless man to switch faces with him, and the person who's put on trial and who's murdered, consequently, is actually the faceless man. And this kind of makes sense with why the person on the spot cannot think the way Littlefinger thinks, why he's so completely out of character the moment he dies. Now, what's interesting about this particular theory is that if Littlefinger's still alive, then there might be a chance that at the end of it, the winner of the Game of Thrones, the guy who ends up sitting on the Iron Throne or the Throne of Ashes at that point, would be Littlefinger, which would be awesome. Because nobody's put in more work than Littlefinger in this game, okay? Dude started from the bottom. Well, I mean, he was still a noble, but he started way lower than everybody else, and he had to claw his way to the top. So I would love it. And he's always been one of my favorite characters. He was one of my favorite characters in the series. And I'm still rooting for it. Also, it would be an awesome twist. So the odds of it happening are nil, mainly because you could tell in the final seasons that the writers did not know what to do with him anymore. But I would love if it happened. Now, let's go to the negative. Let's go for the top 3 things I hope don't happen in the final season of Game of Thrones. Number 3, I do not want Bran to be the Night King. I don't, and everything is pointing in that direction, so I'm hoping that they don't do this. Mainly because they've already broken way too many rules of their own world, and they would be breaking another one. Let me explain. For starters, if you go back to the first times you see the Night King, or even all the way up to Hardhome, when they're in the Wildling town that gets attacked by all the zombies and stuff, the first time you see him, he looks very different than the way he looked in the last season. And the big thing is that they changed the character's nose. And they changed it so that he looks a lot more like Bran. Before, he looks nothing like Bran. He looks nothing like anybody. But in the last few seasons, they changed the nose to particularly look like Bran. So that's my big concern there. And the theory goes, the Bran being the Night King theory, is that Bran is going to go into the past and all the children of the Forest are going to capture him before he can say that, I'm from the future, I'm trying to stop this. And they turn him into the Night King. And so it's going to be Bran accidentally becoming the Night King while trying to go back and stop the creation of the Night King. Classic time traveler drama, right? Now, the reason I don't want this to happen is because there's nothing in this world, in the rules of this world yet, that says that Bran can travel through time physically. Like, we've seen Bran travel through time in his conscience and through visions and affect people that way, but never physically go into the past. So, and this is actually a big rule for George R.R. Martin. George R.R. Martin is the author of the book series, and so the creator of the show. So, a big rule for him is he doesn't believe that time travel can be done physically, but he believes that conscience can travel through time because you're not sending any mass. Let me explain briefly. One of the laws of the universe is that mass cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. So if I send a block from our time into the past, that means that there's going to be less mass in our time and more mass being created in the past, which would create a time paradox, which could collapse the universe. So George R. R. Martin does not believe in mass or a body traveling through time. So if they make Bran travel back through time physically and get captured, they're going to be breaking one of the big rules of George R. R. Martin's universe. And I don't like it, especially because there's nothing that says that he can do it. So that's my big reason there. Number 2 of the things that I hope don't happen in the final season of Game of Thrones is that I hope that killing the mothership does not destroy all the droids. Now, this is a reference to Star Wars Episode 1, if any of you ever saw it, when Anakin Skywalker destroys the mothership and all the droids in Naboo just stop fighting. I hate it. Authors who do that are hacks. They're the worst. It's lazy writing, it's what it is. How about if you actually make your characters overcome the obstacle? Not just like, oh, if we cut the head of the snake, it's done. We don't have to worry about this anymore. Now, I get that it's been set up in the past because they did show that, we killed one White Walker. In the books, they're called others, but whatever. They killed one White Walker and all the other zombies stopped walking. But it's just, if killing the Night King is going to end the White Walker invasion, it's just going to suck. It would be disappointing. It would be anticlimactic. That's the word I was looking for. It would be very anticlimactic and lazy writing, and I do not like it. Anyway, number 1. The number 1 thing I hope does not happen during the final season of Game of Thrones is I hope that Daenerys is not pregnant with Jon's baby. I really hope that she's not pregnant with Jon's baby because it would make no freaking sense. No sense. Like, Daenerys, the only consequence that she's ever had, really, other than losing her baby and her husband, but other than that, the only lasting consequence she's ever, because, her reward for that is she got 3 dragons, okay? That seems like a fair trade. Anyway, so the only consequence that she's really had for her actions is that she was cursed, poisoned. I don't know exactly what happened, but she's supposed to be barren. She can't have children, and that's why the dragons are her babies. And just one line by Jon Snow changes that. Like, Jon Snow saying, Has it ever occurred to you that she might not be a reliable source of information? Fixes that? What? So, by this point, Daenerys had been with Dario Naharis a few years, and unless, let's say Dario Naharis is infertile, or they did anal the whole time, which, by the way, that is confirmed by George R. R. Martin. There's a line in one of the books where he says, he had her in every way a man can have a woman, which is, dude's a super cringy writer. That's not, one day I'll make a reading of the cringiest lines in Game of Thrones, because they're really, really creepy when you read them. They're super cringy. Anyway, but let's assume that, okay, Dario Naharis is infertile, but Daenerys was also married to Hisdar in Meereen. I know nobody remembers Hisdar, but the point is, she was married to somebody else, and they consummated the marriage. So, two guys being infertile, and they were together for a while. So, just one line from Jon Snow magically cures that. Jon Snow, who, by the way, is technically an undead. So, I mean, if you follow the rules that they set up for other undead characters, his heart is not beating. So if heart's not beating, blood's not pumping, you can't get it up, and the swimmers aren't swimming, so I don't like it. I don't want him to do it. It would be stupid and against their own rules, but they've broken those pretty blatantly before, so what can you do? It is what it is. Anyway, those were the top 3 things that I'm hoping will happen this season of Game of Thrones, and the top 3 things I hope don't happen this season of Game of Thrones. Let me know what you think. Again, you can contact me on Instagram at Dario the Show. Leave any comments, questions, suggestions, your theories. What do you think of this list? What do you think of the first episode? How excited are you? Anyway, I'll be back next week, and I'll be positive. I promise I'll be positive on the show. Or at least I'll try to be. I'll focus on only positive things. That's my goal for this year, to be positive. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.